The Pittsburgh Steelers elected their captains on Monday for the season, and among them was Russell Wilson. Now, it's not a shock, but it does open the door back up to talk about what his leadership has meant to the Steelers, considering there's been rumors about him not being a good leader in other places. We'll talk about that with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com, as well as who's going to be the left guard for the Steelers and things to be looking for against the Falcons. All here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for bringing us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders. He's back in the building. We love to have Alan on the show from Steelers Now. Alan, the Steelers elected their captains. No real shockers. Miles Killebrew's your special teams captain. TJ Watt, your defensive captain. Cam Hayward, your overall captain. And then Russell Wilson, your offensive captain. I mean, I felt like who else would it have been? But do you think that Russell has earned the captainship since he's been with Pittsburgh, considering he missed a lot of training camp? Well, didn't get to run with the ones for a lot of training camp. Or do you think this was an earned thing? Like, hey, everyone does rally around that guy on that side of the ball.
I don't even know who else would have got a vote. I mean, they don't release the voting totals for these things, but in my eyes, this could have been nearly unanimous. I thought, first of all, it was just such a, and this is not a shot at Kenny Pickett, but I think this is a Steelers team that is a veteran defense with a lot of big personalities on its defense. And I think those guys were frustrated with a young, developing, unsure quarterback, right? And when you have someone come in who is the exact opposite of that, confident, professional, highly organized, experienced, I just think this was a change that this locker room was looking for. They literally, the defensive leaders went out to recruit Russell Wilson. And so I don't know why it should be surprising to anyone that they've enjoyed having Russell Wilson as their quarterback. No, I don't think this is, I think this is completely legitimate. I think Russ's personality is, I think corny is probably a good word for it. I don't know that he'd call that a compliment. I'm not necessarily using it as an insult. I just think you kind of have to take him for what it is. He tries hard. He wants to win. He's doing the work. He's organized. I don't know what else you want.
No, I feel you on that. And it's interesting because I thought the same thing about Russell's leadership is more of about what Kenny Pickett didn't bring, because I remember, when they first brought him in, there was talks about how, the defensive players were the ones calling him. And then first day of camp, when they're reporting, you see TJ Watt walk by when Russell Wilson's interviewing. He's like, "What's up, TJ? What's up, Russ?" And you just see there's already that connection there. I agree. I think a big part of this is the Steelers wanted a veteran presence, a guy that they didn't have to always check in on, a guy that could handle his own business, but also be the guy that hey, I know how to not just play quarterback, but be the quarterback of a team that needs a leader. And he doesn't have to be the leader of the team. Again, Cam Hayward, TJ Watt, Minkah Fitzpatrick, they got those guys, but the guy who galvanizes the guy who gets the offense, hey, this is what we got to do today. Let's go. Let's get on it. Let's be positive. That guy, I think that's who Russell Wilson is. But I think for a lot of people out there, there is that narrative that he is corny, that there were guys in the Broncos that didn't like him. The stories that Marshawn Lynch and Richard Sherman have shared about him, how they weren't too keen on him. I think those things float around, and those are the things that people still hang on to and say, I don't know if this guy's real. I don't like this guy. I don't think other players like this guy. Just from my perspective, Alan, you're around the team more than I am. That is your full-time gig. You're there 24/7 because you're Steelers Now. But it seems to me when I'm around, I don't get the sense that anybody doesn't vibe with Russell Wilson in the Steelers locker room.
I think there's also like a different dynamic when you are that much older than most of your teammates.
It's a good point.
Like, you know, Ben Roethlisberger and his offensive line were friends because they were all the same age, right? And so those guys had a very different relationship than Russell Wilson is going to have with
They
an
used to go on
offense.
WWE together.
Yeah, right. Then an offense that is all like 15 years younger than him.
Good point.
Those guys just are not going to be doing that. And so I don't know. I think it's just a different relationship that it doesn't need to be the way it was in Seattle. It can be different here.
No, I feel you on that. And I think that's the thing that everyone's kind of looking for right now is to see, what will be the tone. And I think it's just that the anxiousness of needing to see it in real games, right? And see how it plays out. I think that there's no viral clip of Russell Wilson saying, "Let's ride," wrong, Steelers country or anything like that. There's no games have been played yet, but you haven't seen players kind of getting into it with him on the sideline. And I think those are the things that people hang on to. And then there's obvious also you and I have talked about this on the show and off air. Russell talks like a politician when he talks to us in the media. We'll ask him one question about, "Hey, how did this slant route look?" And he's like, "Oh, it was a great slant route. And it was such a blessed slant route because it was in the black and gold and all 53 guys." And he goes through the mantra of all the different things that he has to say that are going to be positive. And not that that's a bad thing. You can clearly see what it is, but he's checking all the boxes because he's a leader. And that's what he sees leaders have to do. And I think that that's not appreciated for the Steelers. They're okay with that because he's checking all the other boxes. He's on time with what he's got to do. He's organized. He's ready to go. Arthur Smith does not have to keep rechecking. "Hey, Russ, are you ready for this? Are you ready for that?" I do think that a part of this is there might be things that people might be able to say "Hey, that seems kind of corny," but guess what? I think the team's okay with corny.
I think the other part of this too is, I think the expectations are different when the team trades half of its good draft picks to get you in the future, and you come in on this huge free agent contract versus a guy who's here on a 1-year vet minimum deal. I just think it's a whole different vibe in the relationship. It doesn't mean that Russ is being a different person. It just means there's different stuff expected of him now.
True.
And so he's not going to be the difference. The reason this team is successful or not successful, that's going to be defined by the defense, by Arthur Smith's offense, by running the ball, by the offensive line. He knows it. We know it. Everybody knows it. No one's here to make Russell Wilson the star anymore. He's just the quarterback. And I think that probably fits his personality a little bit better.
No, I think so too. I think that he gets to just be part of a system, which again, that is when he was at his absolute best, when he could just be part of what Pete Carroll wanted at the quarterback position, hand the ball off to Marshawn Lynch, hit the play action play, play within their scheme, let the defense be great. That's when Russell Wilson was dangerous. He was, and not that he's been, terrible since then, but that was when I think he was at his highest of highs when the Seahawks were at their biggest, and he was right in the mix of all of that. And so I think this can be a little refreshing for Russell Wilson, in the same way that Patrick Queen, some people say, well, he's not the best linebacker in football. The Steelers don't need him to be the best linebacker in football because they got the best edge rusher in football. They got the best safety in football. They've got a pretty good defensive line that has some young guys on it that could be getting a lot better right now. And they have a lot of other pieces on this defense that'll work. Similarly to that, I think that's where Russell Wilson is. Now, the issue is that I think could run into is, do the Steelers have the pieces around him that could make it so that he doesn't have to take over some games on offense? Because we've talked about George Pickens. He looks right, but this offensive line, can it coalesce? The running backs are there, sure. Pat Fryermuth's there, sure. But can he be the conductor that gets all of those pieces in line? I think that's going to be his true test of leadership this year.
Yeah, I think so. And he's got to play well enough to keep being a leader too. I mean, I think that's the other part of it. But so far there's been no adversity, so that part's been easy.
Absolutely. I want to talk about that offensive line though, because it does look like the Steelers have figured out their starter, at least for week 1 at left guard, to replace Isaac Seumalo. We'll talk about that and Alan's thoughts on the Steelers offensive line in week 1. All here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You've heard heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. A reminder, here are the win total projections for the AFC North on FanDuel. The Ravens and the Bengals both sit at 10.5 wins, while the Steelers and the Browns both sit at 8.5 wins. Who will go over? Who will go under? Place your bets with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, which you can download as an app right to your phone or go to their website, FanDuel.com. We have something different for you all through September 22nd. All FanDuel customers who bet $5 can get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, let's talk about the left guard situation. It looks like it's going to be Spencer Anderson to be the guy that gets the first crack at it. Mason McCormick was the other clear candidate there, the guy they drafted. What do you think Spencer Anderson brings to the table that the Steelers would want to? Is it simply because he has more NFL experience because he was with the Steelers last year, or do you think that he has traits that you think will translate well into his spot at left guard?
Yeah, I think he played really well this preseason. I thought he played really well, all the way up to this opportunity. I thought he was the best of the backup interior linemen. He was a guy that kind of played everywhere as a rookie, moved from guard to center to tackle. They really tried to focus him on guard this offseason. Thought the move really paid off. You could really see him and Isaac Seumalo working together. Seumalo gets a lot of days off in training camp, and it was almost always Anderson going in there with the ones, and you could see him kind of coming back to the sideline and picking Seumalo's brain for things. So I think he's a player that they really liked when they drafted him. Wasn't quite sure how his path would go forward because he didn't have an obvious spot, a home. Now I think he has one, and he's doing really well with it.
I think that's part of where sometimes you need. I mean, that's the thing that people are talking about with Broderick Jones. We'll get to him in a little bit, but can a guy just settle into a position? And it's different for Spencer Anderson. Spencer Anderson was drafted in the 7th round, and a big reason why he was drafted in the 7th round was because he was able to play every position on the line in college, and they thought, hey, that versatility, that's going to come in handy someday. And here he is getting looking like he's about to get his first start in the NFL. I agree with you. Settling into a spot is going to be important, and it'll be interesting to see how quickly does he progress, because he's going to be in between Dan Moore Jr. on his left, who the Steelers have been drafting guys in the 1st round to replace, but he's been arguably the best offensive lineman of preseason that's still active right now. And then on his right, he's got Zach Frazier, the rookie center, who actually I thought also looked really good in the preseason, especially in his last game there. When they were able to get the touchdown run with Cordero Patterson. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how he gels with this group and how they start to put together some chemistry while they kind of, wade through these waters without Isaac Seumalo to start their season.
I don't know how much, I think chemistry on the offensive line is something that kind of gets overblown at times, honestly. I think these guys have all played together. They all know each other. I don't know that they need to play together for games and games and games to develop some kind of chemistry. I think we've seen over the last couple seasons the Steelers' offensive line get better as the year went on, but I think it was mostly just younger players improving than it was about playing together. So on that front, I'm not really bothered by the idea of playing whatever the best 5 are. Right now, look, Spencer Anderson's an inexperienced player. He's never made an NFL start. He's going to struggle. There's going to be highs and lows. I think for most young offensive linemen there are, and part of the problem with having so many of them on the line at the same time, whether that, even if it's Broderick Jones, I'm not sure who's going to play right tackle, but he's it's hard. He's not like he's overwhelmingly experienced either, and he's certainly had his share of mishaps. I think the problem is, can they make it so that the negatives don't involve Russell Wilson lying in a pile with defensive linemen on top of him? The man's 35 years old. He's not going to take a lot of abuse very well. They have to keep him upright. He's also not the biggest guy in the world. They need to give him clean pockets with clean passing lanes for him to be able to thrive as a passer. It's not just about him not getting sacked. if a defensive player is able to take a Steelers lineman to somewhere that Wilson is not expecting him to be able to take him, that's almost just as bad because now he can't throw to where he thought he was going to be able to throw. And so I don't know how, Atlanta's a good team and we can talk about their offense, but I think their defense is really underrated. And I think, this is going to be a really, really tough challenge because of this is a very inexperienced Steelers offensive line.
I mean, you said that like a month or two ago when we were talking about the schedule I saw like 4 months ago when the schedule released. Time flies. But when the schedule came out, you said, "Hey, don't circle that Falcons game just yet. That's not an easy one, especially with being at the first game of the season." But you're right. I mean, this is a team that also just added to their defense. They added Justin Simmons and Jesse Bates. That's going to be up there for maybe one of the best safety, maybe if not the best safety combinations in the NFL. Bates, it's funny. The Steelers have had plenty of experience with both Bates at the Bengals, Simmons with the Broncos, and then you add guys like AJ Terrell to that secondary. You got Matt Judon, coming off the edge. Grady Jarrett up the middle on the defensive line. That's going to be tough. Like this Falcons team isn't something to sleep on right now. And I think that's where the Steelers are at, especially with this offensive line. The biggest thing for me, if the Steelers offensive line, if they can just, like you said, keep Russell Wilson from being consistently under siege, that's going to go a long way for this team to kind of navigate things. And I talked about this on the Monday episode a little bit, but I think part of what the Steelers have to do, especially while this offensive line is figuring its stuff out, Arthur Smith has to concoct an offense that doesn't overly depend on that offensive line to be dominant, even though that's a big part of what we were saying, like, hey, this is what they want to get towards, is being the bullies, being the guys that control the line of scrimmage. It's going to be tough for them to do that right off the bat. What do you think are the things that they can do to try to make life easier on the offensive line and maybe find more advantageous situations that lean on their playmakers somehow, and getting the ball in the hands of Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren, George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, without it requiring the offensive line to be dominant?
I think they've got to stay out of obvious passing situations, and that happens both as an offense, meaning they got to stay on schedule and stay out of third and long, but also as a team, they've got to stay connected in the game. They can't get down 3 scores, because then, you put yourself in a position where the defensive linemen can just pin their ears back. And I think that there's an area where I expect this offensive line to be better at. It's going to be run blocking. I think there are some real concerns with the pass protection here, even if they get, healthier than they are right now. It's still going to be a very inexperienced unit. I think they can run block. I don't know about the pass protection, especially right away. They're not going to be a team that's built to come back in games, and they're not going to be able to handle, like we saw in the preseason. It was like, Justin Fields fumbled the snap, and then there went the whole drive because, they weren't able to overcome a 2nd and 12 or a 3rd and long. They're just not going to be built for that. They have to stay on schedule. Luckily, they have 2 really good running backs, so that part of it should not be that difficult. But it's going to take Arthur Smith, I think, doing a really good job calling plays to scheme guys open and keep defenses off balance. I think that's really the big thing. Like we talked a lot last year about Matt Canada's offense, and I thought schematically, some of the stuff that he did was obviously not great. I thought a lot of it was sort of over analyzed, but it was to me, it was less so about like the play than the timing of the call. That was the struggle, right? Where it's like, hey, there's nothing wrong with this play call. You just called it when the other team was expecting it. Arthur Smith has to find a way to do the opposite. He's got to find a way to keep defenses off balance with his play calling, because I'm not sure they really have the personnel to do it. I mean, who's out there like terrified of Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin? Like, it's not going to be the personnel. It's got to be the scheme.
It's got to be the scheme, and I think that there's got a part of it. And I think there's some people out there saying, wait a minute, they can't, like, they have to stay ahead of us. We heard this for the last 3 years. Like, what do you, but here's the thing. This is where Arthur Smith, like, he's worked with these kind of offenses before. He's found success with these kind of offenses before. The Titans offense that went to the AFC Championship, that was not an offense that wanted to be in 3rd and 11.
Had to stay on schedule, 100%. In fact, you saw what happened in the playoffs when they didn't.
And that's the thing, when they weren't on schedule. But the thing that I think could really make the difference between this Steelers team and that Titans team is if the Steelers offense is as good as the Titans offense that year, and granted, Derrick Henry being there is a big part of that puzzle. I'm not trying to just make that, but I'm saying hypothetically, if he was able to get it to that level, That Titans team did not have the defense that the Steelers have right now. And that's what I think the Steelers are banking on, is if Arthur Smith's calling this offense to get these guys in situations where they're winning enough that they are getting the job done, they're moving the ball, they're on schedule most of the time, that's going to yield really good results. And I'm not saying this will always happen this year, but I could see a lot less one-score games that the Steelers win. Granted, when they're up against the tough teams, that's going to happen. The AFC North is also a gauntlet, but I could see, more than a couple times this season where the Steelers, maybe they're in like the middle fourth quarter and you're not sweating as a Steelers fan. You're going to be like, what's this feeling like? Because that hasn't happened too often lately, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, I think they need to play complementary football first and foremost, and I think that's like, there's nobody out there that's saying, "Oh, we don't need to play complementary football. We'll be fine. Turn it over. Who cares?" But I think they're like, this is a team whose offense needs to play complementary football because their defense is so good. Their defense is going to hold up, and their defense is going to get them the ball. They're going to get scoring opportunities from the defense. So this offense doesn't need to be great for the Steelers to be a good team. I think they all know that. I think they have their sights set on the right places. This offensive line adversity is troublesome, certainly. But I still think this can be an average Steelers offense. And if it's average with a great defense, then I think they're probably a pretty good team.
That's what we've been saying all along. But I want to talk about this matchup specifically and how the Steelers might match up with some of those really talented Atlanta playmakers with the Falcons on their offensive side of the ball. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you can download to your phone today. With summer winding down, fall almost here, it's a great time to see live concerts, football games, and get ready for the MLB playoffs. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that make getting tickets for your favorite events even easier. Right now, Game Time Picks filters out the fluffs to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Right now, you can find a super deal for when you search for tickets for the Backyard Brawl at Acrisure Stadium Saturday, September 14th at 3:30, when the University of Pittsburgh, the Pitt Panthers, take on their rivals, the West Virginia Mountaineers, in their big rivalry game. Lower bowl seats right now can go for as good as $130 each. That is a great deal for what is a ruckus college football environment that you do not often see in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's fans, I'll be there covering the game for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Make sure you're there by getting some tickets on Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets to all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. You can get tickets, you can get tickets that are a great combination for price and for location, whether it's a front row at a concert or club seats at the big game. Plus, the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section of row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's Game Time. We're also brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. What's something you'd love to learn? As an adult, do you make time to learn new things as often as you like, or was that lost in your childhood? Kids are always learning and always growing, but as adults, sometimes responsibilities get in the way. Whether you want to get into gardening, learn a new language, or even get better at something you just already know how to do, it's important to tap into that curiosity for you to help grow yourself. That's where therapy can help you reconnect with your sense of wonder, because your back-to-school era can come at any age. Therapy has helped me understand how making sure I'm always learning things helps my mind stay fresh and ready to tackle life's everyday problems by being ready on all angles. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, this is a Falcons team that now has Kirk Cousins at quarterback, but they got Bijan Robinson at running back. I've drafted him like twice in my fantasy leagues. I have 7 fantasy leagues. I have way too many fantasy leagues. It's terrible, Alan. But Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, even Tyler Algier is a problem. This is an offense that's going to come at you in several different ways. They've added guys like Darnell Mooney. Heck, there's former Steeler Ray McLeod. If you guys remember him, he's part of this offense. This is an offense that's going to be able to come at you different ways. What is the playmaker that you think is the scariest the Steelers are going to deal with, considering their personnel and what they do on defense?
I think Kyle Pitts is a problem for every scheme because you don't see too many guys like that. It's actually, to me, a really perfect stressor for this new Steelers defense. I'm really interested to see, the Terrell Edmonds was that guy for the Steelers defense for a long time, where it was like, you see an athletic tight end, just throw 34 over there. He's got it. And I feel like last year they really struggled with the transition to, obviously they had some different ideas and then everything fell apart with injuries. Now I think Deshaun Elliott, they have hopes that he can be that guy. But this is a really tough test. And, they're going to obviously see, you're going to have Njoku in the division. You're going to have Gesicki. You're going to have Anderson. You're going to have Andrews. You're going to have Kelsey in that late December stretch. So they're going to have to figure it out. But I think this is a pretty good test for that early. I mean, my thing is, I just, I don't think that Kirk Cousins scares me, and that's why I don't know about this. Like, obviously they didn't have good quarterback play last year with Heineke and Ritter. I think Cousins will be better than that. I'm just not sure this offense can get to dynamic with Kirk Cousins there. I mean, Drake London can play, Bijan can play, Algier's good, but I don't know. To me, this feels like the Steelers playing the Steelers in a lot of ways, where it's like some of these skill position players are good, but there's not enough of them. The quarterbacking is probably going to be just okay. Also, right, Atlanta's offensive line is also a mess. And like the funniest thing about the entire Arthur Smith sort of tenure there is that here's a guy who was made famous by running the football behind a dominant offensive line in Tennessee, and they drafted all these skill guys.
Yep.
And then everyone just yelled at him for not using all those skill guys when they never gave him a quarterback or an offensive line, which is the things that he needed to execute.
And they chased out the quarterback that he was told that he should build around.
Yeah. And then so their offensive line isn't very good. So I think this is going to be sort of, in a lot of ways, Spider-Man pointing at Spider-Man on offense, where, I think Atlanta's playmakers are probably a little bit more dynamic than Pittsburgh's. I think Cousins is probably a little bit better than Wilson. We'll see how the offensive line shakes out, but the Steelers defense is very, very good. So
the over-under is set at 42.5 right now on FanDuel Sportsbook. Are you just smashing the under with this?
Man, I don't know. Week ones
are always weird.
Week one totals to me are even tougher. Like, I think it's easier to have a sense of where a team is than like sort of specific knowledge about how they're going to score and prevent scoring. I think that's something that to feel good about requires just a little bit more information than we have in week one. So I always think those are tough. I think if I had to pick it, I'd pick under. I don't know how good I'd feel about it. And, I think the Steelers catching points on the road probably feels good to me, even though I do think this is going to be a really tough game and a really good challenge. I think there's two pretty fairly matched teams. Let's say that.
I do think that both bring things to the table that would resonate with one another and resemble one another at times. But like you, I think that the big thing, and I said this on Monday's show as well, I think that a big thing that's going to be a deciding factor is how much more dominant is one team's defensive front over the opposing offensive line than the other team's defensive front over their opposing offensive line. That whichever defensive front looks more dominant, I think that's the team that finds a way to win this game. And there's other parts to match up here, but like if Kirk Cousins is under siege, and because TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith and Keanu Benton and Cam Hayward, if they're all getting in the backfield and he's having to it ruins his timing, it's gonna mitigate the ability of the Falcons playmakers to be the things that prop their offense up. And if the Steelers, on the flip side, are able to just protect Russell Wilson enough to stop that from being the case, that could be the factor that works in their favor. But again, that could also flip the other way around. If the Steelers offensive line comes out, lays a complete egg, and they're the offense getting terrorized, meanwhile, the Falcons offensive line finds a way to lock in, then this could completely flip the script. But I think that's what's going to be interesting about this game. The Falcons have playmakers on offense. Can the Steelers defense one, handle them in space. Like, I think it's also going to be interesting to see how Bijan Robinson gets handled with all the ways that he can hurt you. The Steelers normally are pretty good at handling talented running backs, but can they shut that guy down? Those are all going to be big questions I think the Steelers have to answer when they face this offense that does have a lot of really good skill players.
I mean, they certainly do. I think I'm more worried about the Atlanta defense than I am the Atlanta offense, though. I mean, I think that's the matchup where the Steelers have to win. If their defense can't handle this offense, then they're going to be in big trouble in December. The Steelers I'm talking about.
No, I agree. Yeah, they're facing a lot of good offenses.
Right, but I think that if the Steelers offense can handle this defense, then I think their arrows should be pointed pretty far up.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about this as the week rolls on. Mike Tomlin talks today at noon for his normal press conference, getting back into the normal swing of things here, covering the Steelers. Alan, thanks much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people that can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
At @Saunders_PGH on X, Instagram, and TikTok. PGH Steelers Now is the site's account, SteelersNow.com. Go ahead and subscribe for SN Plus. You got all the best stuff from myself and Derek Bell. It costs like $4.50 a month or something like that. Use promo code Allen10 to get $10 off an annual subscription, which makes it like $3 a month or something like that. I don't know. I'm not doing math. Don't ask me to do math. And you can check out my podcast with Zachary Smith, Steelers Afternoon Drive, on our YouTube page or anywhere you find podcasts.
Absolutely. He's Alan Saunders, does a great job with SteelersNow.com. Alan, thank you for joining us, and thank you all for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.